George Santayana, over a century ago, a wonderful poet, said those who don't remember or who forget their history are condemned to repeat it. Profound words. That's the new book. It's taken us 4 years. There is an author's book card, because I don't want to spend more than 2 minutes talking about the book. These are out on the reception. There's a website, a QR code. They'll tell you about the book. It's taken us 4 years. We started, my wonderful co-authors and I. Without them, the book would not have been completed. And we were looking at epidemics, pandemics, and plagues. And what were the economic responses? Inflation, wages, asset prices, recessions, depressions, booms. We did not go looking for climate change. Climate change, in the research of this book, for this book, found us. We didn't go looking for it. This was an exercise in economics and finance. And we looked at 314 named epidemics, pandemics, plagues that we could find in the recorded history of the human being, approximately 4,000 years, from the plague in Athens to COVID. Climate change found us. Now, I only have about 8 minutes, so I'm going to extract from one chapter of this book, and then the rest of you can read the whole book. And I invite you to do so. If you look at that date, you will see the timing of the third pandemic. 3 pandemics impacted the Roman Empire. 2 of the 3, for sure, had climate change characteristics. It's a question about the third one. What happened in those years? 2 volcanoes, 2 years of volcanic eruption, created a cloud. The cloud reflected the sun. The sunlight, therefore, was diminished. The planet cooled. How do we know all that? Because in the research for our book, we looked at all the ice cores, and we matched them against plagues and epidemics. So we have data. The volcanoes reduced, over time, the temperature of the planet by a little over 2 degrees centigrade. Now, you will hear people who will tell you 2 degrees of temperature change is not a lot. Happens all the time. Well, it doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And this time it happened because of these volcanoes. Separate eruptions, 2 years, cloud cover, temperature went down 2 degrees. What did that do? That's a flea. It's a rat flea. And what it does is feed primarily on the blood of rats. Why rats? Why are rats so important? Because in the Roman Empire, everything moved by ship. And rats are in the holds of the ships. So if you bring a boatload of grain from one place to another in a ship, you also bring the rats. And when you bring the rats, you bring the fleas. What do we know about this particular flea? This flea is very sensitive to temperature change. And when the temperature cooled for the planet by 2 degrees, the flea flourished. Did it ever? So the flea, flourishing, feeding on the rats, killed more rats than normal with a bacteria, and that's the vector for the bacteria. The name of the bacteria is Yersinia pestis. Yersin was the French scientist, and hence it has his name. It's a bacteria. And the flea is the vector. The rat is the target. But what happens on a ship when so many rats are being killed because the flea is flourishing and biting them, and the flea feeds on blood. And when it does, it regurgitates part of the blood as part of the digestive process. More fleas, more dead rats. What does the flea do? It bites the human being. It bites the sailors on the ships. When the sailors land, they are carrying the bacteria. It started with 2 degrees of temperature change. The plague of Justinian, which is the 3rd major pandemic in Roman history, and you can read Gibbon's book, in the decline and fall of the Roman empires, and you can read about all the legions and all the wars and all the emperors. That plague killed half the population of the Roman Empire, decimated it, killed 1/4 of the population of the world. Started with 2 volcanoes, 2 degrees of temperature change. The population of the world fell so much that there was a mini ice age which followed. Why? Because 1/4 of the population stopped cutting trees, stopped chopping down forests, and the forest started to rebuild and suck carbon out of the atmosphere, put it back into a form. The plague of Justinian was the end of the Roman Empire, never recovered. What happened to the bacteria? It spread, it continued for 200 to 300 years. Now we then had the Dark Ages for 400 years, and it resurfaced in a new mutation at a time in Europe which we now call the Black Death, which killed 1/3 of the population of the world. When we started to work on this book, we did not know about the volcanoes. We knew about the emperor. We knew about how he debased his currency, had a big inflation, lost wars, couldn't pay his soldiers, had turmoil. We didn't know about the volcanoes. That's a mistake. In the epilogue, or the 2nd edition, there will be an entire additional section on climate change, because what we have found is climate change is part of this history with disease. We're going to talk about that all day. Let me call Bob Bunting back up here, but let me plant a seed. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the volcanoes. We are the volcanoes. 2-degree temperature change kills 1/4 of the population of the world. Now, some people would say, yeah, well, that was a long time ago, before Edward Jenner had a vaccine, before there was research about smallpox and variolation, before Louis Pasteur helped develop a fight against bacteria. The flea doesn't know, doesn't study the history. The mutation of disease, which is going to get a lot of conversation today, doesn't pay any attention to those statements. We are the volcanoes, whether the temperature goes up 2 degrees or down 2 degrees. Today, we're the volcanoes. The heat is on, and here's Bob Bunting.